Good morning, audience. Today we have with ourselves for Arctos International Werewolf podcast number 13 a special guest. Somebody that is joining us from Moscow, from Russia. Somebody that is joining us from the Eurasian Movement. The Eurasian Movement is something that most Arctos viewers will know about, but will have heard very little about. We are very honored and very pleased to today present to you one of the main spokespeople for the International Eurasian Movement, Professor Leonid Savin, joining us from Moscow today. Professor Savin, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Dr. Volheze. Greetings from Moscow.
Greetings to you back from Western Europe. We are at the moment speaking from two different positions in the world, across a line of battle, of war, a war that you have spoken about in your work repeatedly, forthcoming a war between multipolarity and unipolarity. Now, for the audience that doesn't know you, you are one of the main spokespeople for the International Eurasian Movement. You have been working as chief editor of Geopolitical, which is, of course, a famous online publication in many languages. Can you tell us, the audience, a little bit more about your professional background?
My point of view on professional and professionalism probably is different than the common opinion. People think that men or women go to university, doing some studies, then work next 40 or 50 years in some field, in service, to do business, etc. But I think that people can to obtain more skills during his or her life and to use it practically, and I do this way. So from my point of view, it's kind of probably destiny, not professionalism. But of course, I have many skills, and my first education is technical. I studied in a machine building college, and it's not humanitarian science, and I studied technical mechanics, resistance of materials, programming, etc. And I have diploma for robototechnic complex and machine programming. And later I studied Latin and ancient Greek language, and with antique philosophy and theological college. And my teacher of Latin told me that it was very good that my first education was technical, because it's good for logic, it's good to structure the mind. And I can confirm his ideas, because later I met many people who finished humanitarian science, liberal arts, and I see that they are not disciplined. Not in sense kind of to go to some place and to do something, to be very in time. Not, it means the way of thinking. And so I think that some technical skills, it's good to next education, next knowledge. And I studied later Spanish language and Arabic language in Moscow State University. And when I start my activity like work to gather some money, I not worked a lot of time on factories, because Soviet Union was broke, and I worked in the field of mass media, journalism, and of course it's another type of activity. And then in 2007 I joined International Eurasian Movement and worked in kind of administrative, academic research, and different types of activity. In Moscow State University, in Department of Sociology, for example, together with Professor Alexander Dugin, I did different type of work, and mostly some kind of research, seminars, and then I was lecturer at different universities in Moscow, and also I welcomed by Military Scientific Society of Ministry of Defense, like analyst, and still I am member of this society, and I wrote about 6 books on military, paramilitary strategies and doctrines, mostly in Russian language. And of course, I have many interests and kind of political geography, religion studies, ethnic studies, and political studies. And I try to use my time and also to continue this work and to produce more book articles and to visit different conference seminars and to change idea, to get a lot ideas from other corners of the world during my trips to other countries, mostly in Asia, Africa, and Latin America. So it's kind of my professional background.
Well, yours is apparently a very wide background, a wide view background. But your commitment, as you have said, your vocation is in the Eurasian movement. That is where you are now mostly active. Now, can you tell Western people something about, because mostly we're talking to a Western audience today, about the Eurasian movement, how you came to be interested in it, and what does it represent to you personally?
When I was 19 and I already started my interest to media, I published one DIA magazine and would like to get more quality level. And I have one guy who worked in one new company, very big company, and there was the idea to create newspaper. When I visited his office, we met with director of this company, and it was very interesting. He supported my idea and promised to give me some assistance to produce my magazine. It was kind of counterculture magazine. And then I discovered there was some literature in his office. It was magazines published by Alexander Dugin, Elements, and some almanacs and some non-fiction books like books of Gustav Meyrink, and I started to read it. And I was very impressed by these ideas. I first of time read translation of René Guénon, Julius Evola, Mircea Eliade, and of course articles of Alexander Dugin about political ideologies, political theories. So it was my first step to entry Eurasian ideas. And then in 19th, when I already started another type of magazine, it was titled Kali Yuga, and we contacted personally Alexander Dugin, and of course I already got more information about these ideas. I started to read classical founders of Eurasian movement 1 century ago, Nikolai Trubetskoy, Petr Savitsky, Alexeyev, other authors. And then there was idea to establish Eurasian movement itself in 2003 in Moscow. And then in 2005 was established a youth branch of Eurasian movement. And I was involved in this kind of activity. And as I told, from 2007, I started my full work in this movement. So we continued ideas of classical Eurasian authors and to bring some more skills, more ideas from philosophy, from sociology, and of course, Professor Alexander Dugin was and now is leader of international Eurasian movement that recognized in mostly all countries of the world. And we established some branches in different countries, in Serbia, in post-Soviet spaces, and visited different countries. Where it is not possible to establish officially, we just do some kind of association and have contact with people who are interested in these ideas and to develop these ideas and to spread these ideas over the globe. And of course, one of general line is promoting philosophy and theory of multipolarity. And now we see that it's kind of practice.
Well, you mentioned some of the sources that you read. So there is an organic connection, of course, between traditionalists, the traditionalist school, and Eurasianism. And as you mentioned, there is an organic link between Eurasianism and the current multipolarity movement. But I think it's important for our audience to remember that this is more like a Weltanschauung, a worldview, than an ideology per se. It has a, let's say, a spiritual component as well, Eurasianism. Can you recommend to Western audiences some of the classical Eurasianist writers, or one of them, somebody that you think is really important for Western young people to read and to orient themselves on, material that you think is important?
First of all, I prefer to use in English term Eurasianity, not Eurasianism, because Eurasianity is more larger than just ideology, like communism, like liberalism, etc. And even first authors told that we are kind of political order, not political party. We can include some ideas, political ideas, but we are more large. It's about culture, it's about philosophy, it's about civilization. And we see that many authors use it kind of multi-level approach to studies and to science. We see that, for example, Nicholas Trubetskoy started from ethnography. Then he turned to philology. He one of founder of Prague School and of phonology. And Piotr Savitsky was economist by education, but he also studied geography, political geography. Also, he promoted a lot of ideas like idiocracy, the rulers of who follow an idea, not kind of kleptocracy, democracy, and oligarchy, etc. That, for example, Plato proposed many centuries ago. So it was idea of founders of Eurasian movements, to use idiocracy. And my favorite author is Piotr Savitsky, because he was very active in fields of ideas, but in fields of organization of the Eurasian movement in European countries, because it was born in Bulgaria and then in Prague, because most of people were kind of migrants from Russian Empire. They were expelled to European countries. And of course, from point of view on history, very important is a book of Nikolai Trubetskoy about Genghis Khan. And he proposed another type of view on Russian history, not European-centric, but idea that European centrism is very dangerous, and for Russia and for other peoples and nations over the globe. He told that it was kind of Roman-German occupation, not in sense of direct occupation, but in sense of science, in sense of mind, in sense of ideas inside of Russia. And we see that dynasty of Romanovs, for example, were Western-centric, and they use many Western ideas and bring it to Russia. And they destroyed some Russian classical, traditional approach inside of Russian Empire. So they were critical to Russian dynasty of Romanov, but they also were critical to Bolsheviks, to Soviet Union, because they thought that it was a very big mistake to destroy its spiritual life inside of Russia that became a Soviet Union. They are very critical about destroying church, temples, etc. And they predicted that Soviet Union will be broken because of this approach. They was very critical about Marxist ideas because there is no spiritual level, there is no religion inside. Most of founders of Eurasian movement were Orthodox Christians, but later some persons, followers of other religion traditions joined Eurasian movement. For example, Ergen Kharadovan, he was Buddhist, and his book about Chinggis Khan also is excellent. For example, Bromberg, who was Jewish, and he published book about how Jews and how classical Judaism may be implemented into Eurasian ideas. I think that there was a little bit problem that there was no Muslims inside of founders of Eurasian movement. But now, in contemporary neo-Eurasian movement, we also welcomed some Muslim scholars, and we continue on these ideas. And of course, I need to mention Lev Gumilev, who proposed also another point of view on history of Eurasia. He proposed some hypotheses about passionar implosive, and he proposed ideas of how ethnic groups can be friendly and can be enemy to each other. It's different podkhod that some Western authors who developed ethnologic studies proposed before. For example, idea of ethnocentrum, of Sumner, and the approach this was very different. And what is important, he was in contact with Persavitsky. They sent letters to each other, and Persavitsky also assisted to Lev Gumilev to study it and some historical facts and proposed his ideas. Firstly, Persavitsky proposed ideas of rhythms of history of some waves during the history, and then Lev Gumilev implemented this idea, but from a little bit different point of view to his books about the waves of history, about passionarity, etc. And of course, now Alexander Dugin proposed his ideas how to develop Eurasian philosophy, and of course, many other authors also very important, but maybe not well known in the West.
Well, you mentioned occupation that Russia has been under in various epochs, intellectual occupation, cultural occupation. This is something, of course, that we face in the West, in Western Europe. Western Europe is, in the view of most authentic European intellectuals, under an American occupation, stifling our domestic life. So we can recognize that situation at this moment very painfully in our own countries. You mentioned that Eurasianism as a movement is compatible actually with all authentic traditions, so with all religions, all authentic religions, and that it recognizes a place for all ethnicities that are home to the Eurasian continent. Now, this movement, the Eurasian movement, has gone through an organic development over the decades, and you mentioned already the word neo-Eurasianism. So let's say the Eurasianism that exists around you and around Professor Dugin since the 90s. And you have also contributed yourself a book to this. Many books have appeared through this movement, and you have written a book that is available in English called Ordo Pluriversalis. This appeared just before what we call the Great Reset, so the COVID epidemic and everything that followed on it in the West. But I found it very important because, in fact, in this book, you are showing the fault lines, civilizational fault lines, and great issues that came to the fore in the Great Reset. What was your goal writing Ordo Pluriversalis? What did you aim at?
Of course, first of all, it was interest to more deep doing research about multipolarity. What is the pole, for example? When we read Western author, we see that they follows Western ideas of modernity. They take idea of political pole from geography. There's these two poles, North Pole, South Pole, and also the time of bipolarity brings kind of confirmation of these ideas of Western authors. But I think, and I am certain that we should use another approach. And for example, I do a quotation of Martin Heidegger. He is Western author, but I think that he really universal author, because his idea was very well received in many countries like Japan, like Korea, like Russia, non-Western countries. And he told us that, okay, let's see what poly is etymologically. It's not, it's poly, it's place where the being of people developed, and in some geographical place. So from this point of view, we can to talk about many poles. So we have a real multipolarity world order. It should be multipolar because there are many peoples, many ethnic groups, many worldviews, many philosophical idea. And the main problem is hegemony of unipolarity, of neoliberalism that the West imposed to other part of the world. And maybe from times of great geographic traveling, and because they started occupation of many lands and bring ideas of racism and then epistemological racism, etc. And of course, I discovered that many ideas from other countries, other regions, from Asia, from Africa, from Latin America may be implemented and fill into theory of multipolarity. And I organized this book like many chapters that should be read like different books. For example, one chapter about economics, but not in economics in a classical sense that we should study about money flows, about capital, etc., but about what is behind ethics of economics. And we see that there is kind of Buddhist approach to economics. There is Muslim economics, Islamic economics, for example. There are also ideas of Judaism behind economics, ideas of Protestants in the West, and or of course ideas of Orthodox Christians in Russia and this area that historically was developed like Christian countries, Christian Orthodox countries. The same about other chapters, about security, about what is nation, what is state, and view how should be state organized and how security should be organized. And so there it's kind of discussion way and to bring more authors to develop these ideas. And of course, fourth political theory of Professor Dugin, it was also kind of invitation to discuss and to develop new approach to world politics. And English version of book was published in UK and but also published in Italy in Italian language, in Spanish language in Madrid, and in Portuguese in Brazil. And if to speak about Roman German language. And the first book, of course, was published in Russian in Moscow.
Yes, I can advise people to read this book because it gives a quite good overview of new Eurasianist ideas. It teaches on things like, for example, Catholic distributionism, the Russian Orthodox Soboronost. It explains these things, it compares them, and it shows how each of these economic models, they are grounded in an authentic culture and how they cannot be separated from it. So that's very interesting. I advise people to read the book. A link will be given under this podcast, and also for people who just want to have an overview, they can read my review of the book. It's called Anima Mundi. There will be a link provided to that as well. One of your specialties, Professor Savin, it is Latin America. You have been doing work investigations on the Latin America multipolarity movement, the beginnings thereof. Of course, Latin America is known to the West as a revolutionary hotbed, a place that has resisted the imposition of imperialism and globalism now, new imperialism, and has distinguished itself. The Latin American countries have distinguished themselves as very brave fighters, even against great odds. I like to remind people of a saying of one of the founders of true Nicaraguan independence, Sandino. He said, The sovereignty of a people cannot be discussed. It is defended with a gun in hand. That is, of course, something from Latin America. Now, globalist Russia, anti-globalist Russia, and the BRICS movement are currently forging closer relations with many Latin American countries. But till now, they have been unable to come together and join and make a firm stand against globalism and the oppression that is taking place still from outside. What do you think is the future of multipolarity movement in Latin America?
Yes, there are now kind of new turn in Latin American countries from both sides. The Washington would like to use again the old frame of backyard for our country. So it's a program and projects of Joe Biden to build new systems there and to provide some kind of trade assistance to Latin American countries. In fact, it's soft expansion of United States into these countries. We see that Milei in Argentina and in some other countries, they just would like to be more closer to United States, for example, in Ecuador. And we see that the government of Petro in Colombia is also, in words, they are leftist, but in fact, they play on American side, for example. And we see that a real strong resistance to American imperialism comes from Cuba, Nicaragua, and Venezuela. And of course, they need more support from Russia. We are doing assistance to them. In our last strategy of foreign policy, all countries market like our partners, important partners in this region. But we're ready to cooperate with other countries, like Brazil, for example, because Brazil needs some goods from Russia, like fertilizer, for example. We are ready to cooperate with Chile, Peru, and many other countries. And we see that many movements now, for example, support Nicolas Maduro from these countries. Why? Because he is a real strong man. He resists attempts of United States to organize coup in these countries, and even people from Argentina, despite that Milei is strongly against Maduro, they come to Caracas on many events to support Nicolas Maduro and Bolivarian revolution, because they see future of these ideas to be developed in this region. And of course, from point of multipolarity, there is an important organization like CELAC, like ALBA, and like UNASUR, and Mercosur, and ideas to organize defense bloc. First of all, proposed by Hugo Chavez many years ago, ideas to create of currency of Latin American countries to be used like for intertrade. And of course, idea on the global level to be a kind of very important pole of country hegemony. And yes, there are some limits, for example, in Mexico, because they have a trade balance with the United States, about maybe half of the international trade. It's this part of United States, but they also interested to be more sovereign like before. And we see that victory of Madame Schilbaum and from Morena Party, it's represents the will of people to be more sovereign in Mexico, to be more independent from United States. So I see that at least some countries of Latin America will be our good allies in fights for multipolarity in future. And I hope that other countries will join this camp.
When I was young, in the time of bipolarity, so when the Soviet Union and the United States opposed each other in also an ideological struggle, there were many people around the world, especially in the so-called third world now, we call it the global south, but also inside Europe, who looked to Russia as their representative, the nation that fought for them, that stood for freedom, that stood for emancipation, and that stood for liberation. That, of course, disappeared with the fall of the Soviet Union. But I noticed that there are many people throughout the global South now. If you speak to them, if you do a conference with them, if you talk privately, they have the same look. They look at Moscow, they look at Russia, and they look at the nation as an example for a liberation struggle and as a support for an international liberation struggle. Of course, it has an entirely different political situation around it, and the ideology that underpinned the bipolarity is gone. But this view, I found it very remarkable, it's still there. So people looking to Russia as, say, a source of light, a source of assistance and inspiration. What do you think can be the role of Russia at the moment internationally as a beacon of a different world order? Do you think such a thing is possible? How does Russia see itself in that regard at this moment?
Yes, of course, Russia is an important power, maybe not superpower, but there is, first of all, for Western people need to get more knowledge about Russia, to get more information about how Russia organized it and what Russia to do now. Also, it's mean a special military operation in Ukraine. Because if we read the Western media, we see that it's some kind of anti-Russian propaganda, that Russia start aggression against innocent Ukrainian people. There no mention about coup organized by Western countries in 2014 in February. Actually, it started before in November 2013 against the government of Viktor Yanukovych. There no mention about influence of Western think tanks and NGOs inside of Ukraine, and how Brzezinski proposed to use Ukraine against Russia, for example. So it's a very old idea fixed to use Ukraine like historical part of Russia against the Russia. And of course, the last point was idea to join North Atlantic Treaty Organization. And Russia proposed before special military operation, let's talk, let's to do new negotiation about European security. United States and the Western countries refused this proposal. So it was last instrument to use military power and to organize security of Russia itself. Yes, it's of course tragedy for Ukraine, but it's also guilty of Ukraine that they not join Russia and not join Russian proposal of Eurasian economic unity, because it brings more benefits also for Ukraine. It was pure geopolitical project of the West to use Ukraine against Russia. If talk about more large concept about future of Russia, of course, and why Eurasian idea is important, just look on Russia. It's a multi-ethnic, multi-religious country. So I think followers of any tradition can find this good place to live. And in Western countries, with concepts of LGBT, with concepts of neoliberalism, it's mostly impossible to the follower of tradition, to the follower of normal social life to live there. And recently, Mr. Putin signed a decree that people who persecuted in the West can to go to Russia to live here. And I think it's very good. And many colleagues, many friends, and many counterparts from the Western countries told me that Russia now is the real cradle of the world, and people can to go there and to live openly and to find freedom of speech. The freedom of prey that is important and to do business here in Russia. And of course, Russia is very well demonized from the Western side because the West for century have good experience how to use propaganda against each other, propaganda for other countries. And but thanks to new communications, at least part of the Western people can to get truth now about Russia, not only about Russia, about other countries, about Democratic Republic of Korea, about China, about Iran, etc. So I think it's very important what happens now, and actually these days we have a BRICS summit, and very important that leaders of many countries come to Kazan city to talk with Mr. Putin to see what happens, and it will be another good jump to multipolarity and represent Russia from this side.
You talked about the initiative of President Putin to invite persecuted people from the West to come to Russia if they need. Another thing that you mentioned, of course, is the stance that Russia is taking against the empire of lies, as it is properly called, the West, the Western media especially. But this brings us to the issue of soft power. So the West, for many years, has the Western globalist combine, I call it, or the regime, has interfered in other countries in all kinds of ways. You mentioned also the term multi-dimensional warfare in your book, Ordo Pluriversalis. And this applies hard power as well as soft power. So kinetic power, economic power, sanctions regimes, for example, but also soft power. So soft power is something that is something that's very important inside the West. I'm living in the West and I see the effects of it, which means that a large part of the population is actually effectively brainwashed. It is unable to exit a certain kind of imposed thinking system. And that is because it has been subjected to propaganda and very subtle media strategies. One criticism I hear from many dissidents in the West is that Russia has failed to develop a good soft power strategy, so that it is not applying the same kind of propaganda technology, the same kind of subliminal influence, the same kind of media strategies as the West is doing. How do you respond to that? What is your view of Russian soft power?
I think that soft power is kind of oxymoron because Joseph Nye Jr. worked in Defense Department, and the idea of soft power was developed like just another tool of influence, not to use hard power and to use another possibility, another open windows of opportunities, etc. And if to talk how it works in reality, of course, there is many different types of communications and basis for communication. For example, cultural cooperation, for example, scientific cooperation. And if to compare attempts of Russia, even before Soviet Union to United States, we see that United States have more opportunity to use these instruments because they are much more budgets for studies in United States and to promote some kind of Western bourgeois culture, etc. Soviet Union not use this approach. They use ideology, Marxist ideology, of course, but they not impose it kind of monopoly on this. And till now, Russia not to use monopoly. Of course, you can to go to Russia to study, you can see country, you can be there. For example, Russia provide quotas for foreign students from many countries, and as I know that all quotas not used by students because they prefer to study maybe in United States, maybe in Western countries, maybe in China. I don't know. It's need to be researched. But of course, from my point of view, Russia should be organize more effective information programs about what happens. And we need more teachers of Russian language, first of all, in foreign countries, in friendly countries, than in other countries. And we should to use opportunity of mass media. But we see that, for example, RT prohibited in the West. And there is criminal punishment for the people in some European countries who just look Russian TV. So what Russia can do? It's very difficult because there is a new kind of iron curtain organized by the West against the Russia. And the most of internet communication controlled by Western companies like Google, like Microsoft. They use special tools, they use algorithms just to blockade and to use censorship against Russian media and against just Russian opinion in Facebook and Twitter and other social nets. So there is a real technical problem from one side. From other side, I agree that Russia should be more active. But we, in some sense, we do this work, not from state responsibility, but from our Eurasian movement and from our Russian partners here in Moscow.
Well, you mentioned the Eurasian movement's role in, let's call it soft power, although I agree with you. Soft power, of course, it's more about the spread of perversion and corruption than about anything else from the Western side. But the Geopolitica, of course, the website that you are the editor-in-chief of, the Eurasianist website, it is international. It's available for people to look at essays, many essays published by many people from all kinds of places in the world. You write there a lot, and I advise people to look at it. Their link will be given under this interview. You wrote an interesting article some weeks back that I found very remarkable because it showed the continuity of, let's say, imperialism and globalism. So there are leftovers of the imperialist empires, the Western empires that existed, colonial empires, in certain strategic locations around the world. You mentioned in this regard the French possessions, New Caledonia in the South Pacific, and Martinique, quite close to America in the Caribbean. Strategic locations in many ways, islands that are still in possession of in France, where resistance movements have sprung up. And you show that this liberation struggle that was started, let's say, in the 40s and 50s still continues in these places and is actually even relevant to places in Europe like Corsica. Probably there are others as well. Can you say something more about that? How do you see that anti-colonial liberation movement, international liberation movement continuing? What do you think is the trajectory? How do you think it's developed?
There is some problems. What mean national liberation movement and or it's international, because there are many concepts that unite different liberation movement to one struggle. For example, idea of negritude, about common destiny of black people from African countries and from countries that was used like slaves by Western powers. In this sense, I think Haiti is a very important point because it was first country where was real revolution started in the end of 18th centuries. Nobody not reminded, and especially I mean Western scholars and Western authors. They remind of kind of industrial revolution in UK, Soviet revolution in Russian Empire, but mostly not mind about revolution in Haiti, because it was real first struggle and they succeed and to get independence from their friends during this time. Of course, there is influence of Western powers, of UK and Spain at this moment, because colonial powers would like to control this very important place, like in different areas. And in this sense, I think that it's very important to open real history of many national movements in Latin American countries and African countries, in Asian countries. And of course, there is opportunity to connect them. When I was in Iraqi Kurdistan, for example, I talked with some combatants, and they told me that they have contact with all neo-Marxism liberation movement in the world, in Asian countries and African countries and Latin America, because need to join in one struggle against imperialism, like they think, and to get experience from other countries. And I think it's very useful. And the same about ideology. These movements can to share ideas and how to achieve independence, how to achieve sovereignty, how to use experience of some countries for our own struggle against neo-colonialism of Western powers. And in this sense, I think it's very important what happens in New Caledonia and what just recently happened in the Diego Garcia Island, and about sovereignty of islands of Mauritius that UK would like to give it back, and the other regions. Because, for example, France is still very powerful neo-colonial power. In many sense, they control a big area of water territories and Pacific Ocean, for example, and in Atlantic also. And so from this point of view, there may be useful many kind of mechanism to obtain victory. And I would like to remind that France is behind of many totalitarian ideologies. Ideology of liberalism was born in France. Yes, French Revolution, for example. And they used the guillotine against those who was not agreed. So first state terrorism was born in France originally. Ideas of racism, Arturo de Gubino, for example, book of French author, was born in France. Idea of Nazism, actually, Action Française, also was born in France. It was not Mussolini and Hitler. First, it was in France, and I think it's also because of ideas of Bonapartism later, idea of totalitarian kind of ideology to unite Europe, and then Hitler to use this idea to unite Europe, and then we see it in born of European Union, the same ideas. So when we speak about Italian fascism and German Nazism, first of all, we need to keep in mind France, that many dangerous ideas come from France. From the sense of multipolarity, of course, there should be kind of a deconstruction of French neo-colonial empire over the world.
Well, you mentioned, of course, France as part of globalist combine, geopolitical combine. So that's the thalassocracy, the sea power that surrounds the world island, of course. That's another view of it. There is no doubt that at this moment there is a quite clear distinction between the land powers and sea powers again, in terms of worldview, in terms of interests, in terms of developmental trajectory. We are already in a kind of a multi-dimensional world war, as a matter of fact. Of course, the fronts of this war, the places where people actually die and where they suffer, are at the moment also on Russia's border. And they are, of course, also in the Middle East. But there are many other places where people are part of this great world struggle at the moment. How do you see that struggle developing? So to finalize the interview, if you look at the events of the last couple of years from a Russian point of view, and you see the developments, you see the way in which globalist Western power is becoming more and more desperate, resorting to, I call it necropolitics, the politics of killing, the politics of terror. How do you see that overall development? What do you think is the trajectory the West is on at the moment?
Yes, we see that politics of the West become more and more totalitarian, and mostly Western countries, they try to use this influence of neighboring countries, for example, like Serbia in Europe, and some North African countries on Middle East, and especially what happens in Palestine, Lebanon. It's also continuation of the politics of the West, what Israel to do with neighboring countries. And of course, what happens in Western hemisphere, I mean United States, we see that more disagreement inside of American society happens. And it's the result of years of neoliberal policy of the Western powers, and who began it. We should not talk only about some politicians who just presented like prime minister or like president. There's some oligarch clans began to use money for this goal to control political systems in sense of national policy and in sense of international relations. And of course, from year to year, we see that there are more problems, internal, domestic problems, but also problems because the world just turned to unipolarity to multipolarity. And some Western authors and mostly neoliberal politicians told that it's dangerous because new authoritarian axis rising like China, Russia, Iran, North Korea. Of course, all four countries we can to find in strategy of national security of United States. So we understood why it happens. In Western media, they are doing quotation of these four countries. And they talk about new authoritarian axis, but they not care about democracy, about of our own people. Look what happens in Moldova. It's totally falsified referendum and the election process recently happened there. And the West keeps silence and just again to produce more fake news about Russian interference. Now we see that more fake news about Russian interference in Republic of Georgia, just because before election process in Georgia. And they use media propaganda like cover of our political operation in these countries. But what is more important, because process of uniting of multipolarity power is growing, and because the Russia is less cooperating with the West and not to provide natural resources to the West, economics of Germany, France, other countries now fall down. And I think it's very important to see how the world system organized from economic and political point of view. And people understand more that Russia winning in this long-term struggle against Western power, and West is losing. And despite this very powerful military budget of United States and very powerful North Atlantic Treaty Organization, they are losing. They cannot to keep Ukraine like a normal state, and it's mostly failed states, and in a few months, and it depends of totally depends of the Western funds provided to its economics, and in military sense the same. And I think we will see collapse in Ukraine soon. That will be kind of representations of what may happen in the West. And of course, there is chance for Western countries, just to stop this kind of idiotic policy, neoliberal policy, and to think about how to reorganize these systems, our system, maybe in whole European Union, maybe like different sovereign countries, like Hungary and Slovakia do, for example, and to think about restore normal relation with Russia and other countries, because the age of the Western domination is over.
Of course, we are speaking today for Arctos Media. So Arctos Media is a representative of the European New Right, the dissident right as it is called. It is the closest what we have in Western and Central Europe to, let's say, a liberation movement. The dissident right, both in America and in Europe, has been actually opposing our globalist regime for a very long time. And at this moment, the interests of the multipolarity movement and dissident right are aligned. We are fighting the same enemy, the enemy of the globalist regime that is occupying, in my view, Western Europe. And I'd like to ask from your side, final question. If you have to give some advice, you are acquainted with many liberation movements, with many liberation struggles, with many anti-colonial, anti-imperialist struggles. What is your assessment of the chances of the Western dissidents, the European New Right, the people inside Europe, to stand up and overthrow their regime in a preferably peaceful way, but in a way that leaves their culture intact, that gets rid of this globalist occupation regime? What's your view of that?
Yes, it's very good questions, but it's very difficult to answer because, first of all, I am not part of Western society. I visited many Western countries. I see it and what happens, of course, before, not the last 10 years. But to be honest, it's kind of soft concentration camp in the West. And what people who would like to get freedom back would like to do? To resist. It's possible to resist by legal ways. I don't know actually. To organize political party or movement, to organize petitions, and etc. It's one way that people can do, but it should be very well organized. Another way, it's illegal. And what people should do in the way, they with the risk to be punished by, to go to prison, and etc. There's third way, like proposed Ernst Jünger, or just go to forest, like metaphor, to be normal people, just try to be go to one way, to pray, to have a normal family, etc. But it's very difficult because all people inside of society, and if this society is corrupted, if the society going to abyss, and very difficult to be safe, to save ourselves and to save your beloved people around you. And there's fourth way, go to Russia and other countries, for example. And there is opportunity to some West, but not all can to use this way because need to study Russian language, for example, and they also should be kind of political personal will to use this step. But of course, people need to resist, what I can to say, and to should find of the most possible way how to do it correctly and very accurate, not to be persecuted.
Well, on that encouraging note, I would like to finish the podcast. I would like to finish also with a sentence from Polish that is also applicable to our Eurasian struggle, because Eurasianism is not only from Russia. It applies to all people from the Eurasian continent, and it is a light shining on our path for all Eurasian people, I believe. Za wasza I nasza wolność, for our freedom and yours. thanking you a lot for this interview, for all your insights and for your time. Professor Savin, thank you very much.
Thank you too for opportunity, and I hope we can to discuss a lot some other things more deeply and maybe some special topics.
Thank you very much and goodbye.